Welcome to the lecture seal of the Semiosphere in the course Narratives We Live By, which is part of the University minor Culture and Cognition. The focus of today's lecture is religion, even though it is not mentioned in the title. The reason it is not mentioned as such is because I and many other scholars of comparative religion or religious studies recognize that the border between religion and culture is generally very difficult to draw. So what is the phenomena which we humans, at least Western ones, term religion? I suggest here to look at the Institute religion as seal of the semiosphere, the sphere of semiosis, sphere of meaning. So religion as confirming, sealing the semiotic reality of a society. The term semiosphere was coined by Yuri Lotman in the 80s of the 20th century. Yuri Lotman was born in Petrograd, now St. Petersburg, in Russia, studied philology in the Leningrad State University, and as he was not able to continue to doctorate studies due to anti-Semitism, he moved to Tartu, Estonia, and started teaching there. And during the summer school of 1964, to which Lotman invited some Russian colleagues, they basically established the Tartu-Moscow Semiotic School, a school of thought in the field of semiotics. The term semiosphere, the sphere of meaning, refers to the sum of meanings of a culture, which is the semiotic environment in which this culture takes place, and communication there is possible. It includes positive and negative meanings, things that should be and should not be, whatever can be expressed in the culture, including what is good and bad, what is not important, and what is. All these belong to the semiosphere. This is the sphere which religion, being a total institution, confirms its existence and endows its aspects with the proper attitude. What is moral and not, what is in and what is out. When there were still face-to-face classes where teachers and students met in real time, I used to start this lesson by asking what the students thought religion was. All kinds of concepts and ideas were given as answers to this question, things like ritual prayer, scripture, customs, calendar, faith, and all the rest of the concepts that you see here. To make a long story short, after looking more closely at all these concepts, we realized that these are not reserved strictly for a religious framework. Ritual, hierarchy, binding texts, beliefs in things we don't really know, dress codes, and the others are found in the culture in general. And even more so, each religion uses the texts, the dress codes, etc., that are part of its culture. One will not find Muslim scriptures in an ancient Greek culture, Scandinavian dress code in Tanzania, or Indian gods in Mexico. This is so obvious that we don't even stop to question this. But on a higher register, when we are talking about certain principles, there is a claim that there are things that can only be found in a religion. And I will mention these three here: morality, the feeling of the sacred, and God. Frans de Waal is a Dutch primatologist and a professor in Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. He is famous for his innovative work on primates' social behavior, in which he studies, among other things, moral aspects of primates' behavior. Here is one of the most famous experiments. He's here telling about it in a TED Talk.
Final experiment that I want to mention to you is our fairness study. And so this became a very famous study, and there's now many more, because after we did this about 10 years ago, it became very well known. And we did that originally with capuchin monkeys, and I'm going to show you the first experiment that we did. It has now been done with dogs, and with birds, and with chimpanzees. But with Sarah Brosnan, we started out with capuchin monkeys. So what we did is we put two capuchin monkeys side by side. Again, these animals, they live in a group. They know each other. We take them out of the group, put them in a test chamber. And there's a very simple task that they need to do. And if you give both of them cucumber for the task, the two monkeys side by side, they're perfectly willing to do this 25 times in a row. So cucumber, even though it's really only water in my opinion, but cucumber is perfectly fine for them. Now, if you give the partner grapes, the food preferences of my capuchin monkeys correspond exactly with the prices in the supermarket. And so if you give them grapes, that's a far better food, then you create inequity between them. So that's the experiment we did. Recently, we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
As de Waal said, organization of proper social behavior is found in many animals. Here is another short example of chicken intervening in a conflict between rabbits. And the last example is less obviously moral, but this is why it is interesting. It is a clip from the BBC program.
Over the coming months, the few parts of Antarctica that are ice-free will be the stage on which 5 million adelies will build their nests. To construct one, they need pebbles, and without a good-looking nest, a male will be unable to attract a female when they at last arrive. An impressive property demonstrates your worth as a mate. It takes stones of all shapes and sizes to build a decent nest, and finding ones that are just right is not easy. So some penguins turn to a life of crime. The one who has been robbed seems unaware that the thief is just over his shoulder and looking for more. The The thief's nest is coming along nicely, probably because he keeps a particularly sharp lookout for robbers. After all, it takes one to know one.
In the first two clips of the Capuchin anger about iniquity and the chicken aversion toward conflict, we clearly see a root of what we call human morality. It is less simple in the case of the criminal penguin. He did, after all, manage to steal some stones and was not punished for it. So how to accommodate this? How is this moral? We have a problem with the penguin if we think of justice as something total and absolute. But it isn't. In spite of our ideologies about justice, coming from theoretic cognition, de facto, it is not total and not absolute. It would be more accurate to say that in the real world, that is not in our mind or in our books, justice is good enough. It is never perfect. And this is the case also with the penguin, the petty criminal. The crime is not serious enough to invest more energy in punishment than was already invested. And he stopped his stealing, at least for this nest. In this respect, it is quite similar to our justice systems, at least in how it is implemented, even if it is not what we think should be. Let me just return now to a concept we talked about earlier in the course, the question of self-sustained universe as opposed to the one held from its border. Our fear that the social structure will fall apart if we don't have strong leadership or management may be a bit exaggerated. Since, as we see on a local scale, a small-scale society, things manage themselves eventually. Our strict and high-maintenance institutions are only necessary because of the scale of our societies, which now we try to enlarge to encompass the whole globe. Global village idea. The huge societies that we have in our systems have to compromise local management in favor of submission to a centralized one. So the smaller groups are then held from their borders, so to speak, and compromise their agency to care for themselves. On the other hand, we all know how advantageous large groups are. Jill Bolte Tyler is an American neuroanatomist who, inspired by her brother, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia, studied several mental illnesses. She worked in a lab in Boston. In 1996, Taylor had a stroke. A blood vessel has erupted on the left side of her brain. Being a neuroscientist, she could both experience the stroke and understand it at the same time. The damage on her left side resulted in her experience of reality being processed mainly on the right side. The left and right hemispheres process reality differently, as you know, and so Taylor had a completely new experience of reality, an experience which did not include the categorizing linear type of processing the left hemisphere does. Here is her description of what happened to her on the morning of the stroke.
I woke up to a pounding pain behind my left eye. And it was the kind of pain, caustic pain, that you get when you bite into ice cream. And it just gripped me. And then it released me. And then it just gripped me. And then it released me. And it was very unusual for me to ever experience any kind of pain. So I thought, okay, I'll just start my normal routine. So I got up and I jumped onto my cardia glider, which is a full body, full exercise machine. And I'm jamming away on this thing, and I'm realizing that my hands look like primitive claws grasping onto the bar. And I thought, that's very peculiar. And I looked down at my body, and I thought, whoa, I'm a weird looking thing. And it was as though my consciousness had shifted away from my normal perception of reality, where I'm the person on the machine having the experience, to some esoteric space where I'm witnessing myself having this experience. And it was all very peculiar, and my headache was just getting worse, so I get off the machine, and I'm walking across my living room floor, and I realize that everything inside of my body has slowed way down. And every step is very rigid and very deliberate. There's no fluidity to my pace, and there's this constriction in my area of perception, so I'm just focused on internal systems. And I'm standing in my bathroom getting ready to step into the shower, and I could actually hear the dialogue inside of my body. I heard a little voice saying, okay, you muscles, you got to contract, and you muscles, you relax. And then I lost my balance, and I'm propped up against the wall. And I looked down at my arm, and I realized that I can no longer define the boundaries of my body. I can't define where I begin and where I end, because the atoms and the molecules of my arm blended with the atoms and molecules of the wall. And all I could detect was this energy. And I'm asking myself, what is wrong with me? What is going on? And in that moment, my brain chatter, my left hemisphere brain chatter, went totally silent. Just like someone took a remote control and pushed the mute button. Total silence. And at first I was shocked to find myself inside of a silent mind. But then I was immediately captivated by the magnificence of the energy around me. And because I could no longer identify the boundaries of my body, I felt enormous and expansive. I felt at one with all the energy that was, and it was beautiful there. And then all of a sudden, my left hemisphere comes back online, and it says to me, hey, we got a problem, we got to get some help. And I'm going, oh, I got a problem.
Bolte Tyler refers to her experiencing reality mainly through the right hemisphere as being in La La Land. At a later stage, she processed her experience, and here is how she tells about it looking back.
Eventually, the whole number gets dialed, and I'm listening to the phone, and my colleague picks up the phone, and he says to me, and I think to myself, oh my gosh, he sounds like a golden retriever. And so I say to him, clear in my mind, I say to him, this is Jill, I need help. And what comes out of my voice is, and I think, oh my gosh, I sound like a golden retriever. So I didn't know that I couldn't speak or understand language until I tried. So he recognizes that I need help, and he gets me help. And a little while later, I'm riding in an ambulance from one hospital across Boston to Mass General Hospital. And I curl up into a little fetal ball. And just like a balloon, with the last bit of air just right out of the balloon, I just felt my energy lift, and I felt my spirit surrender. And in that moment, I knew that I was no longer the choreographer of my life, and either the doctors rescue my body and give me a second chance at life, or this was perhaps my moment of transition. When I woke later that afternoon, I was shocked to discover that I was still alive. When I felt my spirit surrender, I said goodbye to my life, and my mind was now suspended between two very opposite planes of reality. Stimulation coming in through my sensory systems felt like pure pain. Light burned my brain like wildfire, and sounds were so loud and chaotic that I could not pick a voice out from the background noise, and I just wanted to escape. Because I could not identify the position of my body in space, I felt enormous and expansive, like a genie just liberated from her bottle. And my spirit soared free like a great whale gliding through a sea of silent euphoria. Nirvana. I found nirvana. And I remember thinking there's no way I would ever be able to squeeze the enormousness of myself back inside this tiny little body. But then I realized, but I'm still alive. I'm still alive, and I have found nirvana. And if I have found nirvana and I'm still alive, then everyone who is alive can find nirvana. And I pictured a world filled with beautiful, peaceful, compassionate, loving people who knew that they could come to this space at any time and that they could purposely choose to step to the right of their left hemispheres and find this peace. And then I realized what a tremendous gift this experience could be. What a stroke of insight this could be to how we live our lives. And it motivated me to recover. 2.5 weeks after the hemorrhage, the surgeons went in and they removed a blood clot the size of a golf ball that was pushing on my language centers. Here I am with my mama, who's a true angel in my life. It took me 8 years to completely recover. So, who are we? We are the life force power of the universe with manual dexterity and 2 cognitive minds. And we have the power to choose moment by moment who and how we want to be in the world. Right here, right now, I can step into the consciousness of my right hemisphere where we are. I am the life force power of the universe. I am the life force power of the 50 trillion beautiful molecular geniuses that make up my form, at one with all that is. Or I can choose to step into the consciousness of my left hemisphere, where I become a single individual, a solid, separate from the flow, separate from you. I am Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, intellectual, neuroanatomist. These are the we inside of me. Which would you choose? Which do you choose? And when? I believe that the more time we spend choosing to run the deep inner peace circuitry of our right hemispheres, the more peace we will project into the world, and the more peaceful our planet will be. And I thought that was an idea worth spreading.
This indeed sounds like a religious experience, if we call mystical experience religious. How can we conceptualize this in a cultural cognitive framework, and is it similar to anything else we know? I frame this experience together with other instances of revelation that we saw in the course, but first let me remind you again, and again only shortly, which talks about the process of creating culture as resulting from the quality of the human brain to recognize a difference between sensory input, as it is understood, so to speak, in the brain, and memory, patterns that have already been learned in the past. When the difference is recognized, a process of explaining this gap begins. And this results in culture, in endowing the sensation with meaning. So the moment of recognizing the reality is a moment of revelation, in a way which initiates a possible change. We saw this process when we talked about I and group. It is a moment of revelation because it is not yet explained. It is raw material which enters the brain, in this case to both hemispheres, not like the case of Jill Bolte Taylor, but it is raw reality which is experienced as revelation. We saw this process when we talked about I and the group and the incentive to change. Both in the ancient stories as well as in your assignments, the incentive was a moment of recognition of some discrepancy, be it mimetic, mythic, or even theoretic in nature. Both Arjuna and Paul recognized the discrepancy between their memory and actuality when faced with an overwhelming reality of the totality of God, as well as Enkidu when faced with the totality of his experience with Shamhat. In a similar manner, Bolte Tyler was faced with the reality as it is, since she lacked, because of the stroke, the processing of reality to which she was used, to which she was accustomed. It was raw reality for her without the processing of the left hemisphere. The feeling of the encounter with the raw reality is explained in religions as the meeting with the sacred. Now, what about God in this framework? If the meeting with the raw reality is the sacred, so why is there a God? Here is where Donald's cognitions come into play with the mythic cognition, which is occupied with protagonists, plots, agency, and causality. When referring to the raw reality of which we just spoke, this reality, just like anything else in mythic cognition, was personified, as this was the tendency of this cognition. Mythic cognition stories the universe and sees natural forces as agented forces. The forces that make up the universe, the raw reality, including natural forces, become personified. Istvan Sakis, a professor of cognitive science of religion in the University of Tromsø in Norway, looked into the question of how the nature of God, who is an infinite power, can be reconciled with the personification, its image as a human, as seen in religions of mythic cognition. This refers not only to monotheistic religions, since the gods of polytheistic religions are also infinite, or at least are superhuman, big, and omnipotent, as we saw regarding the Purusha. Tsaches suggests that the domain general use of recursion underlies the mental representation of boundless qualities and enables conceptualization a God which is both human and infinite. Recursion is a concept originally from mathematics, which talks about creating multiplicity by applying a process to its result. That is, repeatedly applying the same process to the result of the previous application. It sounds complicated, but it's actually quite simple. Look at this visual example. This picture on the cocoa box depicts a woman with a cocoa box, on which there's a picture of a woman with a cocoa box, on which this picture appears again, and so forth. Tsaches suggests that the human ability to use recursion is behind the conceptualization of God as a huge, infinite human. One can think of a person twice as big as a normal person, and then of a person twice as big as that big person, and then one twice as big as that one, etc., until infinity. So personification as part of mythic cognition and recursion are behind the image of God. But still the question stands, what is religion? What we have seen so far, and really only in a short overview, is that whatever we find in religion, we find also in the society as a whole. Morality is found in a form of intuitive justice, including a level of forgiveness, and this is found in the animal world also. We didn't talk about it here, but we also find altruism, actually giving oneself up for the good of the social group, in nature as well, so this is also not uniquely human. We looked into the concept of the sacred, a moment of experiencing the ultimate truth as a result of the suppression of the left explanatory hemisphere and staying with the awareness of the right one. This is the case of Jill Bolte Tyler. If you think that this is similar to the experience of using certain substances, this is possibly true, in as much as we talk about the suppression of some brain functions, while lacking, in the case of using substances, lacking the cultural intention, of course, but this is also different in some Amazonian societies. And when looking into the concept of a personified God, we saw it as typical mythic cognition activity of personifying concepts. Does this mean that religion is a work of the mythic cognition? Not necessarily, and not only. Religion has many mimetic aspects. It could even exist on those alone in prayer-speaking societies. You see here the Zoroastrian handshake, which some think is the base of the European custom to shake hand. Of course, there are also mythic elements of which we constantly hear in religion. The telling of the story of the religion is constantly done, like any social storytelling. It is a basic manner of socialization. Religion has its theoretical aspects as well, in all religions that we know. It consists of systematic theology, legal systems, hierarchical institutions. You see here a Sharia court in England. All of these are theoretic ways of organizing religion. We are still left with the question, what is religion? Let me go back to the term I used in the beginning, the seal of the semiosphere. By seal of the semiosphere, I mean that this institution, religion, confirms, in the sense of declares valid, culture itself. It is the institution that has authority over the semiosphere. It has authority to say what is right and what is wrong, what is in and what is out, what should be done, who deserves what, and what is the meaning of things. Why should this be needed? This is not easy to say. It is true that leadership of various kinds is needed according to circumstances, and that more charismatic people, or older, or wiser, or stronger, could make decisions for the group in ad hoc situation. This could be even the same person each time a difficult decision is needed. This is an informal institution, and it is created ad hoc and is changed when recognized by enough agented members of the society as not relevant or useful anymore. But humans have the propensity to mirror a pattern they recognize. So when recognizing the advantages of an informal institution, such as a person responsible for the culture decision making, they intentionally copy this pattern and thus turn it into a formal institution, which then has a life of its own, as it has an infrastructure that sustains it. Institutionalization is the movement upward of cultural phenomena. Let me give an example from the domain of art about graffiti. Graffiti in modern American setting, I mean US setting, started as resistance art of suppressed social groups, expressing anti-hegemonic statements and considered as dirt, as it was constantly erased. As it became more and more visible, existing more and more, and noticeable more and more, like a swarming phenomena, as described by Deleuze and Guattari, and it became more complex, it became something that people do and more joined in. It was no longer dirt, but something that artists do. And it ended up being accepted into the official institutions, official art institutions, such as museum. And even further, as you see on the right, it is now taught in schools, which means that it has become part of the socialization process of every member of the society. By now, no one can deny that graffiti is art. But it could go even further when rules form regarding, for example, which types of paints are considered graffiti and which aren't, restrictions on size, etc., or perhaps themes even. I don't think this happened with the graffiti, but similar things did happen with certain sports that were rather free and diverse and had to be limited and formalized for the sake of unification when entered the Olympic Games, for example. So institutionalization entails sustainability, as institutions have the means to invest in their own existence. But also, it means reduced flexibility in the negotiation with new conditions when something is institutionalized. So, to go back to religion, once the authority over the culture became institutionalized, that is, carved, so to speak, into the structure of the society, with means to sustain itself and connections to other institutions, it will first sustain the culture, then be costly, and thirdly, will be difficult to change. Changes in religion happen only after they are widely spread in the society. Think, for example, of something such informal clothing, like wearing jeans to church, which is now completely possible in some churches, but it happened only after it was swarming in the society. The use of technologies like screens, which we now see in every church but was not there. Television was banned in religions. Screens only entered churches years after it was accepted in the society. Or homosexuality in the religion, or even homosexual marriage in their religion, which was completely forbidden in churches and are now acceptable and non-issue in many of them. So how does this happen? How does a reality which exists in the flow of reality change into an institution? Well, the first thing an institution does is to establish itself as an institution. This conscious and reflective activity separates the artifact, the institution, from the spontaneous flow of reality and changes it into a thing that is kept in spite of the changing environment. It is there in spite of everything around it changing. And as you can imagine, in order to persist, it needs to constantly re-establish itself, as well as to resist the forces that are trying to change it. This self-establishing happens on all levels, that is, in all cognitions, mimetically by creating itself mimetically, possibly also by non-verbal coercion, which could be very gentle in spite of it being a coercion, like looking with a bad eye on someone who is dressed wrongly, or moving ever so slightly away from someone who is eating the wrong thing, etc. In the theoretical cognitive strategy, it would be by not including someone in the in-group, even though in all other aspects this person might seem part of the group. And naturally in the mythic cognition, by narrating regularly the story of the institution, which tells about its necessity, and also by demanding from the members of the institution to narrate this story of the institution on a regular basis. Here is such a story. The words of institution here meaning foundation, founding, not like social institution. The words of foundation established in the early church. This is a short narrative echoing what Jesus said during the Last Supper, and the Last Supper is what you see here in the picture. It is a formulation made in the early church to be said before receiving the Eucharist, the consecrated bread and wine, which is the body of God and the body and blood of God. Only theoretically, formally, institutional Christians can take part in this in traditional churches. The words tell about the establishment of this ritual, the first time that it happened, by God Himself. So it is the institution, the inner Christian ritual of the Eucharist, establishing itself. Here are the words. For in the night in which he was betrayed, he took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take, eat, this is my body, which is given to you. Do this in remembrance of me." Likewise, After supper, he took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink ye all of this, for this is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for you and for many, for the remission of sins. Do this as oft as ye shall drink it, in remembrance of me." So the participants say these words that establish the bread and the wine as the body and blood of Christ before receiving the bread and the wine, which are the body and blood of Christ, a miracle which happens by through the priest. This is typical for any institution or institutionalized action. First of all, to assert itself. This, of course, makes sense. Accepting the reality of the institution as a condition for taking part in it seems a reasonable request, which indeed it is. But this also means that the institution has to invest energy in this action of constantly re-establishing itself. Energy which is then not spent on what the institution was set to do. So, when religion is the institution which has the authority on what the semiosphere is, it has to invest in establishing itself as this authority as part of its activity. The second text that we work on today does not establish an institution per se, but it uses a narrative, or even a hint of a narrative, to establish the Godhead. I am referring to what is known as the Mispi ritual. The words Mispi in Akkadian mean washing of the mouth. And the washing of the mouth refers to what was done to a newborn right after birth in order to make sure the air pathway is open. But this text is not a narrative and not about babies, but a list of hymns to be sung during the ritual of establishing a new statue of a god. The ritual describes the taking of the sculpture of the god from the workshop in the temple to the river. I'm quoting, "When you wash the mouth of a god on a favorable day in the workshop in the temple, you set up 2 holy water vessels. You place a red cloth in front of the god and a white cloth to the right of the god. You set up an offering table for Ea. You perform the mouth washing and you set up a table for this god." And now you have the text in front of you. You raise your hands and recite the incantation, and that's the name of the incantation, "Born in heaven by your own power." You recite this 3 times. Then the incantation, "From today you go before your father Ea," meaning you go away from the house of your father Ea, the god of water. You recite 3 times before this god, and you take the hand of the god and then it is broken. The incantation, as you grew up in the forest, while going from the house of the craftsman with a torch in front of the god to the river bank, you recite. So they are performing some act to the clay image in the workshop, take it to the river, and from there they go on to a few other places in the city until they bring the statue to the temple. But the recitation, the words that are said to the image, but actually to the people who are present there, are telling that the god originated in heaven as the son of Ea, and that he left his father, grew up in the forest, and ended up being the god in the temple. The words are creating the reality of the god. And even though everyone knows that this is a clay image made in the temple, the religious authority can change this reality and subject it to its authority, the institution. And indeed, from this moment onward, this artifact is a god that was born in heaven and grew up in a forest and ended up in a temple. It is time now for your assignment for this week. Imagine what a far future or other foreign intelligence might think the religion of our secular society as you know it is, be it the secular West or other secular societies. I mean, societies that claim not to be religious. Tell about it in a short 2 to 3 minutes video and upload it to Nestor. This, of course, depends on what the foreign intelligence is, but we will not go there in this thought experiment. I am asking you to formulate your thoughts on the common rituals, myths, institutions that seem from far formalized and binding, even though we might not see it, or that this might contradict our ideology of personal freedom. Think of it as a way to conceptualize your own culture academically.